The knife they used was not a soldier's blade. It was a stylus, a writing tool, repurposed. Small, thin, sharp enough to puncture skin. That detail matters more than most people realize. These were not soldiers storming a fortress. They were senators, carrying tools of administration. The room was the Theatre of Pompey's Hall of Columns. The Curia of Pompey, not the main Senate building. That building was under repair. The meeting had been relocated. The date was the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. Caesar arrived late, which was not unusual for him. He had reportedly been unwell the night before. His wife Calpurnia had begged him not to go. Ancient accounts, written decades later, record this clearly. Whether he took her warning seriously, we cannot fully know. What we do know is that he went. The conspirators called themselves the Liberatores. There were somewhere between 20 and 60 of them. Ancient sources give different numbers. The core group who actually carried daggers numbered around 23. Some were men Caesar had pardoned after civil war. Brutus himself had fought against Caesar at Pharsalus. Caesar forgave him, gave him a praetorship. That is not sentiment. That was Roman political logic. Pardoning enemies was a way of demonstrating power. It also, in this case, made enemies out of allies. The Senate that gathered that morning was not a parliament. It was an assembly of men accustomed to ruling. Rome had been a republic for roughly 5 centuries. Consuls, tribunes, the Senate, shared power, competing offices. Caesar had compressed most of that into one man. He held the title Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. Not a temporary emergency appointment, permanent. Whatever the Senate still decided, Caesar could simply override. For many in that room, this was intolerable. Not because they loved abstract freedom, most did not, because it removed them specifically from the machinery of power. One of the conspirators, Gaius Cassius Longinus, was particularly clear-eyed. Ancient accounts suggest his motives were less ideological than personal. He had expected more from Caesar's patronage. He did not receive it. Brutus is the more complicated figure in surviving sources. He was Caesar's friend, possibly more than a friend. Some accounts, likely embellished later, claim Caesar was his father. That is probably not true, but it shaped the story for centuries. Caesar entered the hall and took his gilded chair. The chair itself was a statement, elevated, singular, throne-like. A senator named Tullius Cimber approached first. He had a petition, his brother's exile, he said. Others crowded in close, adding their voices to the request. This was the signal. The crowd was the cover. Caesar apparently grew irritated. He tried to wave them off. Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it from his shoulder. That was the second signal. Publius Servilius Casca struck first, from behind, at the neck. The wound was shallow. Caesar grabbed his arm. By some accounts, he said something sharp to Casca in Greek. The exact words are disputed across ancient sources. What followed took perhaps 30 seconds in total. 23 men in a compressed hall with short blades. They got in each other's way. Some conspirators wounded each other. A physician later examined the body. Of 23 wounds, he concluded, only one had been fatal. The others were too shallow, too poorly aimed. This was not a trained execution. It was organized panic. Caesar pulled his toga over his face near the end. That detail appears in multiple sources, including Suetonius. Whether it was dignity, instinct, or simply falling, unclear. He died at the base of a statue of Pompey, his great rival, the man whose theater they were standing in. History occasionally has a dry sense of placement. The other senators who were not part of the conspiracy fled immediately. The Liberatores had not planned what came next. They had assumed Rome would simply breathe again, that the Republic would reassemble itself once the dictator was gone. It did not. Mark Antony, Caesar's closest ally, was kept out of the room deliberately. He was detained outside by one of the conspirators. But Antony survived, and Antony was not finished. Caesar's will was read publicly 3 days later. He had left money to every Roman citizen. He had also named his great-nephew Octavian as his heir. The crowd that heard the will read aloud was not calm. Antony's funeral speech, whatever its exact words, lit something. The conspirators had to flee Rome within weeks. Within 2 years, most of them were dead. Brutus and Cassius lost the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Both died there, by their own hands, according to surviving accounts. The republic they claimed to be saving never recovered. What followed was 13 more years of civil war. Then Augustus, Octavian, becoming the first emperor. The Senate survived in form. Its independent power did not. The men who killed Caesar to restore the republic, ended up accelerating the end of it. That irony was visible almost immediately to people living through it. Cicero, who knew most of the conspirators and supported their aim, wrote privately within months that the act had been botched. The tyrant was gone, he said, but the tyranny remained. His letters, which did survive, are among the clearest records we have. As with any event this old and this politically charged, some details shifted in the telling across generations. The famous last words, the exact wound count, the arrangement of men in the room, these vary depending on which ancient writer you follow. What the sources do agree on, the Republic did not return. The room where it happened no longer stands. But the base of Pompey's statue, that location, archaeologists believe they have identified it. A patch of Roman floor, stained and unremarkable now. That is where the most consequential political killing in Western history likely ended. Not on a battlefield, not at a city gate, in a borrowed meeting room with writing tools, by men who had planned the death and not the aftermath.